Hi guys, it's me again. Who else? So today I'm going to be making a video about four artists who were well, one of them was from the United States, but two of them were from Mexico, and one of them was from the Caribbean, um, and I think Cuba actually, and these guys represent artists who were working in the early 20th century. Who had really different points of view because they weren't from the mainstream European New York City scene. They came from their own cultures, and they really were giving voice to not only their own cultural voice, but they're also their own political voice as well, which is really pretty interesting. The first one we're going to talk about is shown here. The picture we're looking at actually is the painting on the AP. This is Frida Kahlo's The Two Fridas, which he painted in 1939. It's a very big painting. It's nearly square. No, it is square. It's 5'8" by 5'8". Many people connect her with the Surrealist movement, but even though her paintings have elements of the fantastic in them, she was not in any way, shape, or form a surrealist. She did not believe, wasn't painting from the subconscious mind. She was painting a very personal set of imagery that had to do with her own self-identity as a woman, a Mexican woman, an upper-class Mexican woman, and her imagery had all about to do with her own iconography, her own symbolism. Her images were the did not her yeah, sorry her she was also connected very much with the Mexican folk art movement, and she was an avowed communist as well. She was born to her father was a German immigrant to Mexico, and her mother was a Mexican who was part indigenous. Her background was or in her family was part indigenous, and Frida felt very closely connected with her indigenous background. But she was also raised in a middle or upper middle class household, which was financially comfortable, and a certain behavior and thought conformity was expected, which she kind of bristled against. As a young woman, Frida was involved in a bus accident that shattered her pelvis, actually, and required surgery several times over the course of her life. Um, from the moment she had this accident as a 16-year-old, she was in a great deal of pain, and she was and somewhat disabled for the rest of her life because of it. In After immediately following the bus accident, she was actually confined to bed for many months while her body healed, and that's when she really started taking up art, actually. And it was at that point that she determined that she would become a painter, and so because of that, she was largely a self-taught painter. But she joined the art mainstream in Mexico City, where she lived, and she met and later married the famous Mexican muralist Diego Rivera, who we'll study in a little bit. At age 18, and this painting came out of the divorce that she had with Diego, and which is a very painful experience for her. She didn't only paint self-portraits, but she did paint a lot of self-portraits, and she looked at herself rather unflinchingly. She exaggerated certain elements of facial features and physical features, and she wanted to explore kind of her otherness. Um, so, so let's take a look at this painting, and as you can see, she shows herself twice, right? And you'll notice that there's some pretty big different. Well, there's subtle differences in the way that she depicts herself. So we see European Frida on the left side with her white dress, You can see that her skin is a little bit lighter toned, and yeah, and she's got a very kind of properness to her. One of the things that's shocking and kind of interesting is that this Frida seems to have her heart missing. You can see that there's a hole cut in the dress, and that there's a cavity in her chest, and that the heart that would be in it is placed on top of the other Frida, the more indigenous looking Frida. Both of them have the classic unibrow that she's famous for, but the more indigenous looking Frida also has the kind of the hair on her lip. She has much darker skin, and of course she's wearing more traditional native, kind of Mexican, more peasant kind of clothing. Um, and and it's yeah, and so let's think a little bit about the heart. And I want you to explore this. I want you to, in your answer, and you're going to explore this imagery of the heart. And I want you to think about a little bit about why she's placed the heart outside of one and on the other. Uh, and and so I want you to think about it after having also read about it and also listened to the Khan Academy. I can't remember if it's a video or article. Um, Thinking about what is the significance of the heart, and don't just answer from your own experience. I want you to think about her culture too. What's another reason why she would choose like a cutout heart, and think about the cultural response to that too. So right now, I want you to stop and on VoiceThread, talk to me about the imagery of the heart. Why she shows it that way, why she shows the veins, why she shows the blood dripping on her dress the way she does. Yeah, it is, it's, it's very interesting, and it's really, really meaningful to her. Um, so I want you to think about that and answer that. Okay, and this is a close-up. Okay, I'm gonna go back. So this next slide I'm going to show you is right here. It's this close-up of her hand holding a little medallion or like a pendant. And you can see that it's a little tiny portrait of Diego Rivera in one hand, which is, you can see that it's not just a portrait of him, but this is actually got one of the blood vessels wrapped around it. And you can see the blood vessel as it goes behind her hand, and there it is feeding, um, you know, wrapping around that little portrait. And if you go to the next slide, you see the close-up of the clamped off blood vessel, but it's not holding. It's bleeding. It's bleeding everywhere. Um, yeah, and the amulet is something of a Colombian tradition too. So it's kind of interesting. So why would the blood vessel be wrapped around also that little amulet of Diego Rivera? It's kind of interesting. I'm going to show you just a couple more images of Frida. Here's another self-portrait. Here's a self-portrait of her with Diego Rivera. And actually, this is not a terrible exaggeration. Diego Rivera was a famously huge man, very, very big and heavy set, really, really talented, very temperamental, and also, I guess, a rather flagrant womanizer, which made it hard for her to stay married to him. And here's another one of her self-portraits. Um, and in this one, of course, she's dealing with this idea of the constraints of being a woman, and of being a woman in, being a painter, being a woman painter in a society that didn't value women artists. And one last really, really powerful self-portrait of Frida with the cat and the monkey and the moths, the transformational moths. And I think it's a hummingbird, which is hanging from the thorns that are piercing her neck. Yeah, so really intense personal imagery. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about two of the more famous African American artists that were painting in the early part of the 20th century. I actually had you read this about this artist who is not on the AP, but I think it's important to read about him to be able to contextualize the next man whose work is on the AP. So the artist of this piece is named Aaron Douglas, and the title of this mural, or I'm sorry, it's a very large oil on canvas, like mural sized, is called Aspects of Negro Life from Slavery Through Reconstruction. And it's 5 foot by almost 12 feet, and it was created in 1934. And it is a really intensely, it's a really intense piece. So it's a bit of a narrative that reads from left to right. And you can see on the left side the African Americans picking cotton, and you can see that they're being looked over and oppressed by the riders of horses, on these KKK guys that seem to be, reaching up to beat them or kill them or something like that. And then in the background behind them, you can see the soldiers. And of course, this is a reference to the Black soldiers during the Civil War. And then the main focal point of this piece right there in the middle is this man with his hand grasping a document. And of course, this document is the Emancipation Proclamation. And then the right side of the canvas has to do with the migration of the African American away from slavery, away from the South, away from the cotton, and which is really interestingly portrayed down here in this little white pattern that goes across the whole thing. And as they move up north to where they will be at least more free, where they will where they will thrive in the cities of the north. And so it has a message that is kind of telling the people, go north. And then the next person that we're going to look at, his work is Jacob Lawrence. This is Jacob Lawrence, the artist Jacob Lawrence, and this is a piece called. Oh gosh, I'm not quite sure what this piece is. I think he actually numbered these. This is one of a large collection. Oh, it's panel 1, I guess, from the Migration of the Negro. And it's the title of the whole collection is During the World War, There Was a Great Migration North by Southern Negroes. And this has to do with Jacob Lawrence's experience of that migration after during the Great World War and after the Depression, how they couldn't make it. The Black Americans couldn't make it on these failing Southern farms, and they migrated more north. Lawrence was a painter who also worked in collage. He is considered a painter of the urban scene and a social realist. And he was looking to address social injustice, and he was also very interested in Black history and also in Black art. And this is panel 1 from the series of 60 paintings, so I'm sorry, I did not have my numbers right, that speak about the migration of the Black folk from the rural South to the industrial North. And half of these paintings are held by the Phillips Collection, which is in Washington, D.C., and the other half are owned by the MoMA in New York. He sold them to these museums when he was quite young. So let's just take a look at this piece for a second, and you can probably tell it's pretty abstracted, and it's kind of cool how he's broken down all, this pretty complex scene into a series of of simple, abstracted, strongly colored shapes, which are really where he's used a lot of very neutral colors, um, they're highlighted with a bunch of real nice brights too, yellows, reds, and those bright blues, and it also almost looks a little bit like a patchwork. And you can see that all the people in this are people of color, and they seem to be streaming in large numbers, women, men, children, to all of these northern cities, St. Louis, New York, and Chicago. So it's likely a train station of some sort. Um, and of course they're moving there because they couldn't find enough jobs in the South. Their treatment was poor in the South. There was still a great deal of lingering racism, Jim Crow laws. Uh, they were they moved north to fill jobs that were open after all the white workers had were exhausted. There were no more white workers. And also there was a disaster in the South that killed the jobs. uh, Social injustice, of course, was pretty systematic in the South, and so they wanted to move north. But I'm going to move on to the next piece. But up north, they found that it wasn't necessarily any better. That there was still segregation, there was still discrimination. It really wasn't any better. This is a really interesting painting. You can see that it's a restaurant that has a section for whites and a section for colored people, and and that it's separated by this kind of golden rope. It's also interesting to see the way he depicts the white men who are sitting and eating by themselves as these kind of big, powerful, kind of angry, not very pleasant looking people. Whereas he depicts the Black people on the right side as much smaller, but certainly and faceless, without facial features. You can't even see what their emotion is. He used a style, and I'm going to go on to another one. Like I said before, that was very flat. He used a lot of primary colors, very stylized. It makes the images look very stark, very moving. And they also have an emotional honesty, which is kind of interesting considering that he very seldom uses facial features on any of the Black characters. Um, and though the paintings may look somewhat Cubist influence, he actually borrowed the bright colors and flat shapes from art he was influenced by from Southern folk art and quilting, and then added his own city twist to it. He used juxtaposition, often densely layering pattern and a kind of surreal space to create a sense of tension in his work. So he's liking this kind of this combination of trying to show space and flatness in the same moment. And we've seen other of our artists working in this way. I'm going to show you a few others. And it's interesting, almost in all of these, it's mostly the white characters that have facial features. This one is really poignant. You can see these kind of faceless Black men who are shackled together behind bars in prison. All right, I'm going to go back here. So you guys, let's ask a question about this. So let's talk. I want you to talk to me a little bit about how the tension between real space and flatness. So like a deep space and flatness. How does he show deep space, and then how does he negate it? How does he move our eye around in this painting? I want you to, and how does he show a give and take between the two sides. So I want you to talk about the space and how it shows real space and flat space both at the same time, how it shows that tension, and how he moves the viewer's eye around in the painting. And I also want you to tell me. I mentioned that the white men look kind of angry. What are the other differences between the white side and the black side of the restaurant? What is he trying to say about the differences between the black experience and the white experience in this piece? Okay, I'm going to move us on to Diego Rivera. So Diego Rivera was the Mexican painter who was I referred to earlier. He was Frida Kahlo's husband. He was quite a lot older than she was, and he was already very, very successful. He worked and lived and worked in Mexico City. He was an avowed communist who was very politically active, actually. This is a piece that this is not the AP piece, but it's a really cool piece, so I want to show it to you. He was a muralist. Diego Rivera primarily did murals, and he was not only hired by the Mexican government and corporations and companies in Mexico, but he was hired by some American companies as well. And especially during the Great Depression, President Roosevelt used art and photography and tried to lift up the economy during his New Deal. He used public art to try to not only improve America and make spaces beautiful, but he also was trying to in his New Deal program, he was trying to put artists back to work as well during that time of really massive unemployment. Um, Diego Rivera, though, of course, wouldn't have benefited from that because he was a Mexican not an American. But he was very famous, and so he got commissions from private industry. He was a child prodigy. He attended the Art Academy at Mexico City. He attended it. It's like a university at age 11, and he spent a great deal of time in Europe after his graduation, and he met many of the important artists and thinkers in Europe at that time, including Picasso. And he also met several other Mexican artists there, including David Siqueiros. And together they would launch a tradition of mural painting in Mexico that continues forward today, which is kind of interesting. This mural, which is called Man, the Controller of the Universe, it's a fresco that is 37 and a half feet wide by almost 16 feet tall, was first commissioned by the Rockefellers in the RCA building at the Rockefeller Plaza. The theme was to be man at a crossroads, looking to a new and better future. And as you can see, you see this kind of technology in the middle, and this man who seems to be working with either a microscope or a telescope. It's hard to tell. You can see that it's this huge scope of some sort, and you'll see that one ellipse makes it look as though the images it looks at would be outer space, and so it's a telescope. But the other ellipse shows that it might be a microscope, because you can see it looks rather cellular. So it's kind of interesting. So it has to do, of course, with technology and science as bringing a new, good, bright future to mankind in the center. But once we move out of the center, you can see on the right-hand side, he's very much referring to communist Russia. And on the left-hand side, he's referring to the capitalist United States. And you can tell very easily by looking at the two sides which side he thinks is better. So I would love to ask you questions about this, but this isn't the AP piece, so I don't want to spend your time looking, having you answer questions on the voice thread. But just look at the difference between the right side and the left side, and notice how not only does he make the American side look much more militaristic and kind of faceless and horrible, but look at how, if you look down at the bottom on the left side, how the people look kind of like as if they don't think for themselves. They just sit there and watch television, or they gamble and smoke and party, that they don't live productive lives. Whereas over here, we've got athletes, and we've got happy workers and good politicians, all people who are helping move culture and mankind forward. It's really, really interesting. Um, yeah, the harmony of communism versus the despair of capitalism, which is kind of interesting. All right, so this next painting is huge mural. Oh, before I leave this, I've got to tell you. So he got this thing about half finished and all drawn out, and it was about half painted in Rockefeller Plaza when the Rockefellers um, um, came to look at it, and um, and they saw it was really interesting. He was supposed to be he it was supposed to be include great American politicians, but the Rockefellers, but which it didn't, and the Rockefellers just couldn't get past the portrait of Lenin, um, and right here, and all of this communist kind of glorifying, and so they actually paid him off. They paid him the full sum of creating the mural before it was finished, and they destroyed it, which is kind of interesting. So it does not exist there, but interestingly, so right after he left New York, Rivera went back down to Mexico, where the Mexican government paid him a smaller fee to paint the very same mural in their big big building for the arts in Mexico City, and that's where it is now. It's at the Museo de Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. So it's in their art museum there, which is kind of funny. All right. This mural is also in Mexico City. This is called "A Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Central Park," and it was painted in 1947. So that was another almost 13 years after Man, the Center of the Universe was painted in New York. This is an incredibly complex scene, and I'm going to probably break it up into parts to be able to describe what's going on. There is so much going on in this scene. In general, it's meant to be kind of a big festival like Dia de los Muertos. You can see some references to that in a park. So this is the great Central Park in downtown Mexico City. So, and all of these people and all of these things are happening down there in the park. And it actually is meant to show 400 years of Mexican history, all kind of mashed together in this one mural, which is amazing. It's full of recognizable faces, as well as anonymous types of people as well. And at first glance, the painting is, it's really happy. It's really bright yellows and greens and reds and blues. It's really pretty colors. It looks bright, happy, festive. And then when you look more carefully at it, you start seeing that it's not all as happy as it might seem. So let's take a look at some of the, so, okay, I'm gonna just go back. This scene that I'm gonna show first is over here on the right side with the horse that's rearing up. And if you look down below that, you can see a policeman roughing up an indigenous family on the right, and next to him is another man shooting somebody in the face, actually. I mean, look at that, right? So here's the policeman roughing up the indigenous Mexican, and here's another person killing a person right in the face. And that person is also being trampled by a horse. And if we go over to the other side by the balloons, we see some interesting types of people. He called, oh, whoops, I want to go over one more. Okay. He called this woman, this skeleton woman, a Katrina. She's dressed like a European lady, and that's a critique of an upper class Mexican elite woman. And notice that the Katrina is holding the hand of a little Diego Rivera. So this is a portrait of himself, and you'll notice that behind him, he's painted himself almost as a boy, and behind him is a portrait of his ex-wife, Frida Kahlo, who is holding the yin and yang yin and yang sign. And you'll also notice this Katrina is wearing what looks like a feather boa around her neck, but you'll notice that it's actually a snake, which is interesting. And that snake is meant to look like the Aztec snake goddess, Quetzalcoatl, which is interesting. On the other side of the skeleton lady is another famous Mexican artist of the time, over here, and that was Jose Posada, and an artist who died in poverty and unrecognized. And and I'm looking at my notes, and of course Frida is holding on to this yin yang sign and this is of course his imagery of it, is that this shows their interdependence, and even after they were divorced, they remained close. The overall layout of this painting is meant to read almost as a chronology, starting with the defeat of the Aztecs that were colonized in the air. The Aztecs who were called by the Spanish conquistadors, and then the Mexican fight for independence and the Mexican Revolution, which happened in 1910 to 1920. And here he gives us a sense of the inequalities that caused the revolution. He goes on to chronicle, okay, I'm going to go back. Let's see. Yeah, here's a bunch of the history, the politicians. Let's go back to the big picture. There we go. And he goes on to chronicle the making of a democratic nation. And of course, this over here is all of the politicians that followed. And also a land of workers' rights, which were, of course, dear to Rivera's communist political leanings. In the end, the question is, what was he trying to accomplish with this history mashup? And so maybe that's what I'll ask of you guys. This is a really complicated painting. I'm not expecting you to know every piece of symbolism. There's a lot to be had in here. But I think that's what I will ask of you is, with this huge mashup of so many pictures, so many people, so many events, what was he trying to do here? What was Diego Rivera's goal with this? So that's the first question. What was he trying to accomplish? And number two, how is he trying to accomplish it? Yeah. So what was he trying to accomplish, and how is he doing that? Okay. I'm back through all of the details. So many funny things. The pickpocketing. There's touching and lovely scenes and really horrible scenes as well. Katrina's, Bible thumpers, the politicians. All right. Our last artist for tonight is Wilfredo Lam. He was one of Cuba's most famous artists, and he had this is a picture of him. He had a really unique background, being descended from a Chinese immigrant father and an Afro-Cuban mom, which is kind of interesting. He began his career studying art in Cuba, but eventually wound up in Madrid, Spain, where he fought alongside the Spaniards in the Spanish Civil War, which is interesting. This earned him the respect of Picasso, who he later met in Paris, and who also became an advocate for his work. And Picasso introduced Lamb to all of the great artists at the time, the Cubists, the Expressionists, and the Surrealists. And here is Lamb's most famous piece, which is the AP piece. This is called The Jungle. It was painted in 1942 to 1943. So, and it's really interesting. So I want you to just look at it carefully. And I want you to notice all of these elements in here. And I want you to tell me if you notice some of these other styles. Can you see that Lamb has maybe borrowed from, not borrowed, but been influenced by some of the other styles that he might have seen in Europe? Maybe, right? But not really. There's a certain really unique quality to it. So this is a jungle. So I want to ask you, what kind of jungle is it? Notice these almost bambooish looking stalks that run throughout the whole thing. You see these bambooish stalks? Yeah, this isn't like a jungle of palm trees and all that kind of stuff. This is a sugarcane jungle. Yeah, that's sugarcane. And why was the jungle made from sugarcane? What did sugarcane represent? On Cuba, it was probably the largest cash crop in Cuba. So what would it be like to farm the cane? Who did that? What was it like? Did the people who worked the fields gain any of the money that they might, you know, that might be earned from the sugar cane? Yeah, no, not so much. So what do we see? Not only do we see the cane, but we see all these body parts, right? You see legs, feet, lots of different feet. You see butts, you see horse heads, you see people heads, you see cat heads, you see breasts. You don't see a whole lot of bodies, a few, but lots of legs, some arms, and definitely a whole bunch of kind of disembodied, I would say mostly limbs, which is interesting. So the space is super claustrophobic, it's super fractured, nothing feels connected. So what's he trying to say about this? What was going on in Cuba at this time? What was the government like in Cuba? So this is before Fidel Castro. The government was corrupt and it was totally sold out to American corporate interests. And it was during the worst years of Cuban excess and corruption before Castro led the communist revolution there. Lamb had left Europe and had come back to Cuba, and he'd come back because of the war. The World War II was raging in Europe. But when he came back, that's when that whole kind of amalgam of European influences crashed into his own Cuban roots. This Afro-Cuban, Afro-Cuban, Caribbean African style, the color, the sugar cane. Yeah. I want to show you another image. Come on. There we go. Look familiar? It should. We studied it. The Yorubian veranda posts, those elongated bodies. Here's some more Wilfredo Lamb. Okay, so let's go back to this. All right, why all of these bodies in the sugar cane? Why so disconnected? There's a little bit of a sense of space and ground, but it's very tight. And are all the body parts connected? And if not, why not? Are there enough? Yeah. So what is he trying to say? Does it have anything to do with his Caribbean religion? Do you remember what the name of that religion is? Yeah, Santeria was this mix of African mysticism and Catholicism. Remember, the practice of Santeria has a mystical quality that can also feel really somewhat surreal. And Santeria also has some of it's in Santeria that we also see some stuff like voodoo that was part of what we were studying with African art before, and how certain power figures were kind of what they did in Africa was kind of changed and adjusted when people left and came were as slaves and came to this new world. All right. So here's the question here. What, with all this mix of body parts and plants and animals, what message is Lamb trying to communicate? It's complicated, right? At this time, what was Cuba like? Who was Cuba for? Who visited Cuba? Who ate Cuban sugar? Did they know what it was like for the people who lived there? For the workers who worked there? What is he trying to communicate with this one? So that's your last question.